A lot of people write off Spark the Electric Jester as a Sonic clone. Well, they're right that these games are Sonic clones, but they're wrong to write them off because of it, and in doing so, they're missing out on some top-tier platforming. There's no downplaying the fact that the Spark Trilogy primarily works as a pretty close riff on the Sonic the Hedgehog games, but what this dev has done out of passion for the Sonic canon is sometimes quite near unbelievable. It's not an exaggeration to say that the peak of this trilogy can rival some of the very best moments from Sonic games. Personally, I've always been a bit of a Sonic guy, though I guess my patience with the franchise isn't as generous as some people allow. Like, you won't catch me out in the streets defending stuff like Sonic Unleashed. Sonic Riders, I got your back, bro, but let's forget the Werehog. Sonic Adventure 1 and especially Sonic Adventure 2 go extremely hard, so give me some more titles like those. It's funny because people cry out for Sonic Adventure 3, but only one Sonic game released since actually resembles the Sonic Adventure blueprint, and it just so happens to be the worst thing of all time. So I guess it's up to someone else to pick up the mantle in the meantime. Before we get to Sonic Adventure and the third dimension, we have to start with the original Spark the Electric Jester, which takes inspiration from classic Sonic. The Spark Trilogy is masterminded by a Brazilian indie dev and Sonic fan known online as Lake Feppard. Before creating Spark, he had made several hugely ambitious Sonic fan games. Eventually, he launched a Kickstarter to develop his own original game, and so Spark the Electric Jester was born. This trilogy is pretty much a one-man project, with some exceptions like music composers and so on. Spark 1 shares its DNA with three notable 16-bit titles. First is Sonic. Obviously, this game looks a lot like Sonic and inherits the high speed, as well as the verticality in the level design, with focus on forward momentum and navigating multiple paths. Secondly is Kirby. Spark can pick up various abilities that change his attributes and attacks, much like how Kirby can copy the powers of his enemies to update his moveset. Thirdly is Mega Man X. The combat and attacks that Spark has feel a bit like X and Zero's movesets. The cartoony sci-fi setting and plot also does feel most aligned with the Mega Man X series as well, I think. Honestly, all three of these game series each showcase a lot of the best bits of this era of gaming, so a combo with emphasis on the Sonic inspiration seems ideal for a Super Nintendo era throwback. Spark controls like Sonic with a focus on building and maintaining momentum to silkily speed through various levels, though he has an increased offensive moveset compared to Sonic, with some basic combos. The level design reflects this, with a larger number of enemies to fight than in Sonic. Instead of the spin dash, he has a normal running dash that is great for getting you that little bit of extra momentum needed to run up a wall, without stopping to charge it up like Sonic has to. This dash move is great because it helps prevent any punishing moments where you're just about to lose momentum or struggle to gain momentum quickly enough. There's also these various power-ups that change Spark's appearance and moveset. You can switch between two at a time. For example, the Wind Jester gives you more maneuverability with a triple jump, slower falling, and an air dash, at the cost of some reduced offense. You've got an Ice Jester who can freeze water at his feet so you don't have to fall underneath. There's actually 16 different variations of Spark in total, some of which give him weapons like a sword or a bat. Here's the Fire Jester, an Edgy Jester. I wonder what this character's based off of. I really enjoyed this surfboard power-up. This really blended well with the high-speed platforming and made it look even slicker. None of the power-ups felt like an essential one I wanted to hang on to for most of the game. I found it fun to periodically switch to new ones. Though for me, the weapons with longer range like the hammer or the bat were most useful due to their larger attack hitboxes. Spark 1 is generally a lot of fun. It controls nicely, looks on point, and is packed with a good amount of content. And I love the soundtrack too. Lots of bouncy electronic or light guitar rock. It's exactly what you need for this sort of game. Though there's a couple of issues I had. Firstly, fighting enemies in this game isn't really very satisfying. There's a reason why Sonic's attack is just a jump or a spin dash, because they keep up his momentum. Spark's attacks work better in tight spaces and can make boss battles exciting, but mostly this isn't as good as the high-speed platforming bits. Particularly later in the game, they just throw so many enemies at you, and it doesn't come across like great game design. Flooding the screen with enemies that you don't want to fight and don't have to fight ends up feeling like cheap pot shots. Similarly, later in the game, the levels start to feel a bit needlessly long. Compared to Sonic, there's not as much reason to properly explore the multiple paths in each level either, unless you're a speedrunner. Maybe if they cut the fat a little bit at the cost of a shorter game, then it'd be okay. Bear in mind, this took me about 3 or 4 hours to beat the core game, but they also have some extra modes where you can play as Fark, who is more combat oriented, and also a mode where you can switch between all of Spark's power-ups at will. Playing as Fark makes the combat more of a focus, and he can even parry, which makes fighting enemies a little bit more involved, but still not fully satisfying. Platforming at high speed is the primary attraction. Spark 1 is also a bit buggy. Generally the game plays well, but launching it can be a pain, and also pausing will often make the game freak out and crash, so you'll have to lock in, no bathroom breaks to get through all these levels. I do really like the one-man love letter to 16-bit gaming that Spark the Electric Jester ends up being. It's an extremely undisguised riff on Sonic, Mega Man X, and Kirby, but the combo of all three combined with a charming new character ends up really fun. Truthfully, it doesn't hugely innovate on anything that its influences did, but it's a sweet little cocktail, and especially impressive for its scope considering it's a one-man project. I talked about it in my video about recent nostalgic 3D platformers, but the best games will copy the base of something and then dress it up as their own to make for a convincing disguise. With the amount of extremely unsubtle winks and nods to Sonic, it pretty much amounts to fan game levels of worship. It cements Spark 1 as an imitator. It doesn't quite surpass its origins, as essentially a sequel to a set of Sonic the Hedgehog fan games. Realistically, this doesn't matter much because the game is still very fun, but it's a game for fans of the existing franchises that it borrows so heavily from, rather than managing to totally stand on its own. When you first see Spark 2, you might be like me and think, no way. This is still a game created by just one guy, but he stepped things up quite a bit. The madman actually did it. He's just casually made a new Sonic Adventure title all by himself. Well, if Sega aren't going to do it, why not DIY one out yourself? Surely Sega must be keeping the Sonic Adventure free card close to their chest as a Hail Mary in case of an underperforming Sonic title, so they can appease fans and in turn appease shareholders. Probably the same with remakes of the first two Sonic Adventures, especially if they're making big expensive movie adaptations that rip a lot of the core plot from Sonic Adventure. But yeah, Spark 2 takes a marvelously ambitious jump from 2D 16-bit Sonic worship into 3D Dreamcast era Sonic worship. Unfortunately, much like the old YouTuber cliche of saying, Sonic had a rough transition to 3D. It does sometimes apply here in Spark the Electric Jester 2. Spark 2 feels like a prototype, there's no getting around it. Without getting ahead of myself and giving the full context of what Spark 3 is like in comparison to this, it pretty much cements Spark 2 as a test run. A necessary little project to warm the dev up ready for the real thing, but relatively obsolete these days. Boot this up and once again, there's no hiding what this game is trying to be, with this menu that is straight up ripped from Sonic Adventure 2. Spark the Electric Jester 2 doesn't actually have the character Spark in it. You play as Fark, the robot anti-hero Shadow-esque character. The game was actually going to be called Fark the Electric Jester, but someone must have told the dev that this was potentially brand recognition SEO suicide. The story is more involved this time with these simplistic cutscenes between levels, though to me it came across mostly as vaguely edgy nonsense. It's like fanfiction tier writing. It wasn't until right at the very end where it starts heavy ripping off Dragon Ball Z that I finally got sucked into the shonen drama and got hyped up. Spark 2 plays like Sonic Adventure. You have a homing attack and you'll be going around some of the most absurd roads imaginable that loop-de-loop for no reason. It ends up feeling not quite as tight and the way momentum works feels quite iffy. For some of you this might start ringing alarm bells, since the Sonic Adventure titles are not exactly airtight in terms of controls. Playing with a controller, I found the high-speed portions of this game to be hard to control and too easy to lose momentum when turning. It's a bit better if you switch to the keyboard and mouse, but still leads to quite a few frustrating moments. This time the soundtrack was throwing me back to like Monster Cat era YouTube EDM with all its bright bouncy synths. Were any of you guys Monster Cat heads back in the day? Disconnected by Pegboard Nerds was pretty much the best song ever to me back like, oh god, 12 years ago? Again, Spark 2 has nice music and it pairs well with the colourful aesthetics and gooey textures. They even bust out some Crush 40 type butt rock for the boss battles, which is a lot of fun. Real anime type, shit's getting real moment when they bust out a song with vocals like this. The highlight of Spark 2 for me was this level, Titanic Tower. You start from the bottom of the tower and climb all the way up to the top. If you miss a jump, you'll have to scramble to land so as to not have to retrace your steps too much. I like how it seems so daunting at the beginning, but you get in a kind of rhythm working your way up. It's a shame that I found myself wrestling with the controls a bit in the trickier segments towards the top, but still, very cool level. This level here, where you speed through a fleet of spaceships, is nice as well. They looked at the opening cinematic of Sonic Unleashed and said, yeah, that's cool, but let's make it playable. You can't really fault this game for lack of ambition compared to the number of people working on it. Gets a little too busy with how much stuff is happening, but man does it look cool. In fact, this bit made me think that some parts of Spark 2 feel like the sort of game that looks way more twitchy and skill focused than it actually is. If you're playing this and your grandma was watching, she'd probably be amazed that you dodge all the enemies and are going so fast, but in reality you're just jumping and dashing past everything. This relates to a massive flaw carried over from Spark 1, and that is that fighting enemies just isn't worthwhile. Now this time they've added a very simple character action style moveset with some light combos for Fark. This is particularly in use for the boss battles, which are one-on-one arena battles where you pummel the boss with combos and try to parry or dodge their attacks. There's a bit of a disconnect from the locked-in combo-mad beatdowns and high-speed Sonic Adventure running. So just like in Spark 1, I would just try and sail past all the enemies rather than engage with them. The Kirby-styled power-ups are also back, but are far less of a focus than the original. They mainly change Fark's offensive moveset, though each will offer some small platforming boosts like a better dash or an extra jump. They've tossed my dude a Halo Plasma Sword. This gives me like DeviantArt OC vibes. Spark 2 is worth a look, but it's inessential really. But also if you can find it for cheap, it's a pretty inoffensive way to spend 2 hours of your time. I can't fault the game's spirit. Having done as much as he could with 16-bit Sonic, one dev just said, hey, let me try making my own Sonic Adventure title. And even though it's far from perfect, it's incredibly commendable that this even ends up fairly decent. Okay, so Spark 3 is where we finally reach peak potential for this series. It takes the tracks laid down by Spark 2 and then blows its predecessor out of the water, opening with this thumping soundtrack, no dialogue, and racing in this car. Spark is back, and this time he's deadly serious about taking on Sonic at his own game. There's a few good things I immediately noticed once they put me in control of Spark again. Firstly, right from this very first little movement, I can tell the controls are so much nicer. Spark just feels way tighter, but still slick and swift. He's really well weighted, and controlling him at high speed feels so much more satisfying now. It just feels so much better, and it's not even like Spark 2 was bad, but here it's been eclipsed immediately. This first level right away feels so much more tangible than anything in Spark 2, with a lot more character. See all these little NPCs hanging out. It's not just colourful platforming blocks in liminal space anymore. There's one big normal Sonic Adventure-esque level per world, and then a bunch of smaller levels that carry over the same aesthetic, but offer either shorter challenges or an exploration-based collectathon level, which can be nice changes of pace. The combat's been improved too, and while it's not going to give Devil May Cry a run for its money, it feels satisfying to pull off combos and land parries. Finally, we've worked out how to satisfyingly include combat in the game. While most small enemies can be homing attacked, they'll drop you into some shorter combat sequences occasionally that wall you off until you complete them. I never felt like these were pace killers, since they're relatively infrequent across the game's various levels. Also, the fact that the combat is fairly fun now also makes it feel like a cool switch up from all the bombastic high-speed platforming. I like the aerial combos, and parrying feels way better now too. It could still be improved, but we're pretty much there with it. The main levels this time are long once again, but don't outstay their welcome. They're very bombastic with big set pieces. And one thing I really love about the Spark 3 level design is how each level changes as you progress further through it, making it feel like a little adventure you're progressing on, rather than just a slice of one location. This first level you start in this little cheery town before venturing more out into the countryside. I like how far you can see into the distance and that you can actually run there. It is quite impressive for a game of this size. Level 2 is hardly hiding its Sonic influence. It's pretty much lifted right from Sonic Heroes, which also, funnily enough, was recently revisited in Shadow Generations. But hey, this is roller coaster platforming at its finest. Grinding on rails is never not fun as hell. This level here is a banger. You drive to this spaceport and trespass through to reach the rocket ship and board it, after which it takes off into the skies. This is big set piece as a platformer level stuff that makes the Sonic games kick ass, and it's replicated here in Spark 3. This is a reasonably distinct idea as far as I'm aware too. I love the extra moving parts in the level setting that makes this more than just a point A to point B platformer. There's an added urgency and variety within a singular level. This world has a mecha boss fight as well, because of course bro, we got hype moments on tap in Spark 3. It doesn't quite reach the levels of absurd cool moments as Sonic Adventure 2, but that game has an elite ratio of set piece, roller coaster, jaw on the floor type stuff. All the levels are pretty enjoyable with a few unique touches and varied settings. These levels are so well designed as well. The amount of little paths and hidden shortcuts you can get to is incredible. This time the plot and writing are far more defined, though a lot of the story is presented in these lore dumps between levels. Other than these lore dumps, the plot takes a backseat for much of Spark 3, though it does come back wearing some unexpected new clothes in the endgame. Though I say this game's writing is more defined, but it's way more bizarre now. Like Spark opens conversation to this character by asking what are those about her breasts. This dude has catastrophic levels of Riz. Also, this is actually him asking about her breasts. It's not a joke or a scene I've taken out of context. Unless you're hardcore on board with the Spark lore by this point, even in context, it comes off like weird horny writing out of nowhere. So I have to respect the audacity of putting this bit in without clear explanation. If you're wondering, like I was, what did he mean by this? Then the context for Spark asking about her breasts is because the characters in this universe don't have breasts, and as such, this moment is subtle foreshadowing as to the character's true nature. What is this Galaxy Brain writing, bro? One of the most fun things about this game is how it's clear that between Spark 2 and Spark 3, the developer watched Evangelion and was like, that anime went harder than anything ever, and then decided to rip it off. Having your life changed by watching Evangelion is a relatable experience for me personally, so I respect the hustle. It's also not entirely out of character given the sci-fi stuff at play in Spark, but they really just said, let's do end of Evangelion type shit at the end of this goofy mascot platformer. It's the best kind of whiplash. Now this is for sure a bit jarring given the suddenness of this dark tone shift, especially when it's then distilled by over-the-top shonen type shit and ending on literally Friday Night Funkin'. But I do like how unrestrained this is to get weird and wacky. It really feels like this dev didn't run this plot past anybody and just went all in on his vision. And for that we are blessed, because it's weird and silly in such incredible ways that are a sight to behold. After you beat the last level, you unlock every level from Spark 2 as well, which does end up cementing Spark 2 as obsolete. RIP buddy. Playing through these levels with the updated controls feels so nice. I'm glad they're here, and they keep the art style too, so it's just like playing the originals but with Spark 3's more intricate controls and physics. Particularly the later Spark 2 levels feel so much better with the updated controls, and the high-speed sections are way less finicky. For another one-man project, I think Spark 3 goes way past being just impressive. It's genuinely a pretty top-tier 3D platformer. It's very fun to play, the levels are deceptively well designed, and Spark's movement allows for high-level playing than what you might initially imagine, leading to repeat runs of levels being really rewarding. Combine this with a story that's batshit in all the best ways, a soundtrack full of bangers, and really solid visuals too. To me, Spark the Electric Jester is a trilogy that shows how passion for existing media can fuel something new. Sure, Spark does borrow quite a lot from Sonic, as well as Kirby, Mega Man, Dragon Ball, Evangelion, and various character action games like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, but lots of great art is essentially collages of existing stuff anyway. Like think of how Metal Gear Solid cribbed so much from various films, or Quentin Tarantino's movies like Kill Bill or Django Unchained are influenced so heavily from other movies. Spark does pull some stuff a little bit too wholesale to really elevate the series to the same level of consciousness as its influences, but is that necessarily an issue? So does Spark 3 actually end up surpassing Sonic Adventure 2? Well, in some ways, it's tighter to play and straight to the point. From a raw gameplay perspective, you can argue that it does surpass Sonic Adventure 2, since it is deliberately looking at that game and aiming to iron out its gameplay as a sort of unofficial spiritual sequel. These levels are pretty intricately designed for those who love speedrunning and trying to find new tricks to reach faster paths. It plays really smooth and encourages repeat plays. Though Sonic Adventure is more than just gameplay, Spark's world and characters don't quite match Sonic and Friends, especially since on top of all the riffs on Sonic, it rips off a bunch of other media too, like a Frankenstein monster of Japanese video games and anime. Its tone is split between happy-go-lucky mascot platformer cliche, Dragon Ball's shonen edginess, and then for the finale, an incredibly strange left-field twist into End of Evangelion type psychological thriller. In comparison, Sonic Adventure's story is kinda bad, but it's the sort of bad with such cheesy quotables and wonderfully unnatural dialogue that it makes it an absolute blast. Sonic Adventure takes itself remarkably seriously and keeps that tone front to back. To be honest, it's a breath of fresh air going back to those games because of just how deadly serious they are about this absurd story, where Shadow is a clone of a giant lizard who is now a hedgehog for some reason, and witnesses child murder, and Sonic is buddies with the president. Like, they're not joking. They want you to know this is a real blockbuster video game story, and you need to lock in and get invested. Sonic Adventure also still has the better blockbuster moments in its levels. Really, nothing in Spark comes close to stuff like the whale chasing Sonic in Emerald Coast, pretty much all of City Escape, grinding down the bridge in Radical Highway, or snowboarding in Ice Cap. Spark 3 comes close, but even then, sometimes it's a case of, I already played this in Sonic. Though a lot of what Sonic Adventure does better, you can wave it away since that was a game with a massive budget and a massive team behind it, not just one dude. I gotta pay my respects to Lake Feppard because the game design in Spark is often incredible. And sure, he may have taken some shortcuts when it came to storytelling or conceptualizing levels, but the passion for high-speed platforming beats so hard that it's easy to forgive. Since finishing Spark 3, the dev has released a new game, XF Extreme Formula, which is pretty much a homage to F-Zero GX, the same way Spark 3 is a love letter to Sonic Adventure. I guess this guy's niche is going to be unofficially bringing back game franchises that have been long dormant since the early 2000s, but I'd love to see him free himself from the shackles of such obvious points of inspiration and go all out to make their ultimate original game, especially if it gets as crazy as Spark 3 often does. Spark shows the spirit of unofficial fangames being carried over into something that can come together to form its own original game. Despite owing such a heavy debt to various other gaming franchises, especially Sonic, Spark 1 ends up a really fun homage to the 16-bit era. Spark 2 is a really impressive recreation of Sonic Adventure's mechanics by just one person, and then Spark 3 eclipses what 2 already did quite well and does everything even bigger, better, and tighter, even coming close to being able to move out of the shadow of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Maybe being so obviously indebted to the Sonic franchise really prevents Spark from breaking through into the mainstream, but it is absolutely worth a look as an inspirational one-man project to make games just as cool as the ones he grew up with. Yo, thanks for watching, guys. If you watched all the way through, then massive thank you. It would really help out my channel if you leave a like or a comment. I'm really having fun making these videos and the response so far has been very encouraging. Thanks again for all the support, and I'll see you guys in the next one soon.